Julian Thorne, the billionaire recluse whose name was a whisper in boardrooms and a ghost on stock tickers, returned to his private marina only to be paralyzed by the sight of a small black boy, no older than 7, huddled on the deck of a decaying vessel with 2 newborn infants sleeping in a cardboard box beside him. The boat, the Serenity, had belonged to his late sister, and the pristine white yachts flanking it seemed to recoil from its peeling paint and air of profound neglect. Why would a child be left to guard infants alone on a derelict boat in the heart of unimaginable wealth, and whose polished smile concealed a darkness this profound? The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows across the docks, the gentle lapping of water against pylons the only sound in the unnerving quiet. Julian's return was unannounced. He preferred it that way. For 5 years since the accident that had claimed his wife and daughter, he had moved through the world like a phantom, his fortune a fortress that kept intimacy at bay. He had come to the marina to visit the one place that held a tangible memory of his sister, Sarah, a place he usually avoided for the sharp pain it invoked. He expected silence. He expected sorrow. He did not expect this. The boy was a sentinel, his small shoulders squared with a responsibility far beyond his years. He wore a thin, dirty t-shirt that did little to ward off the encroaching evening chill. His eyes, wide and dark, followed Julian's approach with a weariness that was ancient and heart-wrenching. He wasn't crying. His face was a stoic mask of grim determination. He was protecting his cargo. Julian stopped at the edge of the slip, his custom-made Italian leather shoes inches from the grimy deck. The boat listed slightly, a wounded thing amidst the perfection of his world. He could see the babies more clearly now, bundled in thin, mismatched blankets inside a flimsy fruit box. Their faces were tiny and serene, oblivious to their precarious situation. "Hello there," Julian said, his voice softer than he'd used in years, the sound of it foreign and rusty in his own ears. The boy didn't answer. He simply shifted his body, a subtle movement that placed him more squarely between Julian and the box. It was an act of pure, instinctual protection. Julian raised his hands slowly, palms open. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm a friend of Sarah's." This was her boat at the mention of his sister's name. A flicker of something, recognition, pain, crossed the boy's face before the mask slammed back into place. Julian took a careful step onto the gunwale, the boat groaning under his weight. He was a large man, and he tried to make himself smaller, less threatening. As he came closer, he saw the details that twisted a knot of cold fury in his gut. A half-eaten, browning apple sat on the deck, the boy's only provision. The cabin door, which led to the boat's small interior, was shut, and a heavy-duty padlock secured it from the outside. They weren't just left here. They were imprisoned on this floating wreck. He reached out a hand, intending only to offer a gesture of comfort. Suddenly, the boy flinched, a violent, full-body cringe. He squeezed his eyes shut and threw a small arm up to shield his face, a gesture that spoke not of defiance, but of dreadful expectation. It was the movement of a child who knew the sting of a striking hand. Julian's own hand froze in midair. His breath caught in his chest. The protective rage that had been simmering within him now ignited into a cold, clear inferno. He had seen that flinch before in war zones, in the eyes of the broken and the terrified. To see it here, in a child on his own property, was an obscenity that his soul could not abide. In that silent, chilling moment, looking at the terrified boy and the helpless infants, Julian Thorne, the man who had walled himself off from the world, made a quiet, unbreakable vow. He would find who did this. He would uncover the truth, and he would bring down the heavens upon them. He slowly retracted his hand, crouching down to be at the boy's level. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice a low thrum of reassurance. "I'm not going to touch you. My name is Julian. What's your name?" The boy remained silent, but his arm lowered slightly. His eyes, like those of a cornered animal, darted from Julian's face to the newborns and back again. "Your sister, Sarah. She was my sister, too." Julian tried again. That makes us family, he pointed to the infants. Are these your brother and sister? A small, almost imperceptible nod. Progress. They're beautiful. You're doing a very good job of keeping them safe, for the first time. A flicker of pride touched the boy's features. Julian knew then that the path to this child's trust was through his role as protector. Julian took off his own charcoal cashmere coat, a garment worth more than the boat itself, and gently laid it over the cardboard box, ensuring it didn't cover the baby's faces but created a warm tent against the wind. The boy watched his every move, his suspicion warring with the clear evidence of kindness. Julian pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. His first call was not to the police, that would come later when he had an airtight case, but to his estate manager. Eleanor, prepare the East Wing guest suite. 3 children. One is about 7, the other 2 are infants. I need a pediatrician and a child trauma specialist on standby. And food. Simple food. Soup, bread, milk. Now he hung up before she could ask questions. He then called his head of security. David, meet me at Marina Slip 44. No sirens. Just you. I'm bringing guests home. He looked back at the boy. We're going to go to a warm place. A safe place. You and your brother and sister. I promise you. The word promise seemed to hang in the air. The boy considered him for a long moment, his gaze unervingly intelligent. He then gave another tiny nod. With painstaking slowness, Julian lifted the box containing the infants. They didn't stir. The boy scrambled to his feet, sticking close to Julian's side as they disembarked. As they walked down the dock towards the waiting black car, the boy finally looked back at the locked cabin of the Serenity, and a single silent tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. The opulence of Julian's mansion was a stark, almost violent contrast to the children's neglect. The soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and priceless art seemed to mock the dirty t-shirt and the cardboard box. But the staff, under Eleanor's firm command, were discreet and kind. The pediatrician, a gentle older woman named Dr. Eris, examined the children in the warmth of the suite. The infants were underweight and dehydrated but otherwise unharmed. The boy, who they learned was named Leo, had several old, faded bruises on his back and arms, and was suffering from malnutrition. But his deepest wounds, Dr. Eris noted quietly to Julian, were not visible. Leo refused to speak a single word. He communicated only through nods and by pointing, his eyes constantly tracking the location of his baby sisters, who the staff had named Hope and Grace for the time being. Once the children were bathed, fed, and sleeping soundly in warm beds under the watchful eye of a highly paid specialist nanny, Julian retreated to his study, the cold fury now honed to a razor's edge. His sister Sarah had died 6 months ago in a sudden car accident. Her will was clear. Her 3 children were to be left in the care of their maternal aunt, Clarissa Jennings, with a substantial trust fund to provide for them. Julian, estranged from his emotions and his family since his own tragedy, had approved the arrangement from a distance, ensuring the funds were transferred. He had trusted that Clarissa, a prominent socialite and philanthropist, would be a loving guardian. He had been catastrophically wrong. He dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice a symphony of polished charm. Julian, what a surprise. I was just at a planning meeting for the Children's Benevolence Fund. So much to do. Clarissa. Julian's voice was flat, devoid of warmth. I have Leo, Hope, and Grace. There was a beat of silence on the other end, a silence that stretched just a fraction too long. Then the performance began. Oh, thank God. You found him. I've been worried sick. Leo, he's become so difficult since his mother passed. He ran off this afternoon while I was on a crucial conference call for the charity. I was just about to call the police. You can't imagine my panic. The lie was smooth, practiced, and utterly plausible to anyone who didn't know the truth. He was on Sarah's boat, Clarissa, with the twins. The cabin was padlocked from the outside. Another beat of silence, this one charged with tension. The padlock? Oh, that must be from the old groundskeeper. He was meant to be clearing out the boat. Leo must have gotten on before he locked it. The poor dear. I'll come and get them right away. You shouldn't have to be burdened. Her attempt to re-seize control was immediate and confident. No, Julian said, the single word carrying the weight of his entire fortune and resolve. They'll be staying with me for now. We have much to discuss. He hung up, the click of the phone echoing the closing of a door on Clarissa's world. His investigation had just begun. The next morning, Julian sat with Leo in a sun-filled playroom that had been hastily assembled. The boy was still silent, but he had accepted a box of crayons and a sketchpad. Julian watched as Leo drew. His creations weren't the usual childish scribbles of houses and suns. He drew a big, dark, boxy shape, the boat with 3 small stick figures inside. Then he drew another figure, much larger, with a wide, smiling red mouth and angry, jagged lines for eyes. This large figure was standing outside the box, holding a key. The symbolism was as clear as a confession. Julian felt a fresh wave of revulsion. Clarissa's public face was one of radiant charity, a champion for children. Her private face, sketched by the hand of a traumatized child, was that of a monster. He tasked his security team, composed of former special operatives, with a single objective: uncover everything about Clarissa Jennings. He wanted her finances, her social circles, her appointments, her entire life mapped out. While they worked, Julian took a different approach. He drove back to the marina, not in his Bentley, but in an unassuming SUV. He found the groundskeeper, an old man with weathered skin and wary eyes named Silas, tending to the flower beds near the dock. Julian approached him quietly. "I'm Sarah's brother," he said, forgoing his own famous name. "I'm looking into what happened to her boat." Silas stopped his work, wiping his hands on his overalls. He looked towards the Serenity. His expression clouded. "Sad business. That boat used to be so full of life. I found her son on it yesterday," Julian said, watching the old man's face carefully. Silas's eyes darted around the marina, as if afraid of being overheard. He lowered his voice. "I've seen things," he muttered. "Didn't feel right, but it ain't my place." "It is your place," Julian said, his voice firm but not threatening. "It's everyone's place. Tell me what you saw." The old man hesitated. Then the dam of his fear seemed to break. "The fancy woman, the aunt. She brings the boy here. Started a few months back. She'd lock him in that cabin. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for the whole afternoon. Told me she was teaching him a lesson about running off. Said he was a troubled kid." He shook his head, his gaze filled with shame. "Last week she brought the little ones too. Left them on the deck in that box. It was a cold day. I wanted to say something, but she's, important. People like me, we learn to keep our heads down." Silas's reluctant testimony was the first external crack in Clarissa's facade. He had provided the corroboration Julian needed. The smiling monster was real. But this was just a witness account. Julian needed something undeniable, something that would tear down her carefully constructed world in a single, devastating blow. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Julian's team, digging through Sarah's personal effects which had been in storage, found her old laptops. Sarah had been a meticulous record keeper. Buried in a password-protected folder labeled Household, Julian's tech expert found a subscription confirmation for a cloud-based security camera service. The camera itself was a small, innocuous device disguised as a teddy bear, which Sarah had placed in the nursery to keep an eye on her newborns. When Clarissa had moved the children into Sarah's house, she had redecorated, but in her arrogance, she had simply tossed the toy into a closet, never suspecting it was still active, still connected to the Wi-Fi, and still uploading every sound and image to a secure server. Julian and his lawyer Marcus Vance, a man whose courtroom demeanor was as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass, sat in the silent, darkened media room of the mansion and watched the footage. What they saw was a portrait of pure evil. The video clips, time-stamped over months, showed Clarissa's private reality. There was no physical violence, she was too clever for that, but the psychological cruelty was relentless. They watched her screaming at the crying infants to shut up, leaving them in soiled diapers for hours. They saw her cornering Leo, her voice a venomous hiss as she told him his mother's death was his fault, that he was a worthless burden she was forced to endure. "You are nothing," she spat at the little boy in one clip, her face contorted with a rage that was terrifying to behold. "Your mother left you, and soon enough everyone will." But the final, damning piece of evidence was a phone call she took in the nursery, believing she was alone. The camera captured it all. "The trust is almost clear," she said, laughing a dry, brittle laugh. "Another few months and I can have them declared wards of the state. Unmanageable, emotionally disturbed. The doctors are already on my payroll. The entire fortune will revert to me as the sole remaining family guardian." "It's perfect," Marcus clicked off the monitor. The room was heavy with a sickening silence. "This is more than enough, Julian," he said, his voice tight. "We can destroy her." Julian stared at the blank screen. The image of Clarissa's snarling face burned into his mind. "Destroying her isn't enough," he said softly. "She needs to be erased. Her entire world, the one she built on lies and the suffering of children, has to turn to ash in her mouth." The plan was audacious, theatrical, and utterly ruthless. Clarissa's crowning social achievement was her role as chairperson for the annual Children's Benevolence Fund Gala, a glittering affair attended by the city's elite. It was the pinnacle of her public persona as a saintly protector of the innocent. It would be the stage for her execution. In the days leading up to the gala, Clarissa, sensing a shift in power, made a preemptive strike. She gave a tearful, exclusive interview to a prominent journalist, painting a tragic picture of her troubled nephew and the overbearing, grieving billionaire who had taken him. She spoke of Julian's own family tragedy, subtly suggesting he was unstable, projecting his own loss onto her and trying to steal the only family she had left. "My only concern," she said, dabbing a perfectly feigned tear from her eye, "is for the well-being of my sister's precious children." The article was a masterpiece of manipulation, and it swayed public opinion. Julian was cast as the villain, the cold-hearted mogul harassing a grieving, dedicated aunt. It was a brilliant move, and it made the stakes for the gala impossibly high. The night of the gala arrived. The grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel was a sea of jewels and designer gowns. Clarissa stood at the podium on stage, bathed in a warm, golden spotlight, the very picture of grace and compassion. She was in the middle of a moving speech about the sacred duty to protect the world's most vulnerable children. "We must be their voice when they have none," she proclaimed, her voice ringing with false sincerity. "We must be their shield on cue." The grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Julian Thorne stood there, flanked by Marcus Vance. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his presence sucking all the air and light from the room. He walked down the central aisle with a slow, deliberate pace, his eyes locked on Clarissa. The room fell into a dead, expectant silence. Clarissa's smile faltered for a second before she plastered it back on. "Julian," she said into the microphone, her tone a perfect blend of surprise and condescension. "We're so glad you could join us, but this really isn't the time or place for a private family matter." On the contrary, Clarissa, Julian's voice was calm, yet it resonated with an authority that silenced any potential whispers. "This is the perfect time and place. You were just talking about giving a voice to the voiceless. I'm here to do just that." He nodded to Marcus, who handed a small hard drive to the audiovisual technician. "What is the meaning of this?" Clarissa demanded, her voice rising in panic. "You have no right." "I have every right," Julian said, turning to address the stunned audience. "You all know this woman as a philanthropist, a champion of children. I'm here to show you who she really is." And then, the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the charity's logo, flickered to life. The first clip played, Clarissa screaming at the crying infants. The audio was crystal clear. The audience gasped. The next clip, her venomous, soul-destroying monologue directed at a cowering Leo. More gasps, turning to murmurs of horror. Clarissa's face went white. "This is doctored. It's fake. He's trying to ruin me," she shrieked. But then the final clip played. The phone call. Her gleeful, sociopathic plotting to have the children institutionalized and steal their inheritance. The sound of her dry laughter filled the opulent ballroom, a sound of pure, unadulterated greed and cruelty. No one could doubt the truth of what they were hearing. Her entire world of lies crumbled in the space of 90 seconds. The crowd stared, silent and aghast. Clarissa stood frozen, her mask of civility shattered, revealing the ugly, twisted reality beneath. But Julian wasn't finished. He gestured towards the main door again. A woman, the specialist nanny, walked in, holding Leo's hand. The boy was dressed in a smart new suit, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. He looked small and fragile in the vast room, but he walked with a new confidence. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at Clarissa. Her face, already a mask of horror, contorted further. "Leo, baby," she stammered, taking a step towards him, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to play the loving aunt. Leo stopped. He looked at the monster from his drawings, the woman who had locked him in the dark and whispered poison into his soul. He raised a small hand, pointed a single, steady finger at her, and spoke the first word Julian had ever heard him say. It was not a cry for his mother, nor a plea for help. It was a judgment, delivered in a clear, unwavering voice that cut through the silence of the ballroom. Monster, that one word was the final blow. Clarissa Jennings collapsed, not in a delicate swoon, but in a writhing, pathetic heap on the stage, sobbing and screaming denials that no one believed. Her breakdown was total and absolute. As uniformed police officers, who had been waiting discreetly in the wings, moved forward to escort her away, her social world lay in ruins around her, a pile of glittering ash. Justice had not just been served, it had been publicly and spectacularly delivered. The legal proceedings were a formality. Faced with the irrefutable video evidence and the testimony of Silas the groundskeeper, Clarissa was swiftly convicted of child endangerment, fraud, and a litany of other charges. Her name became a synonym for hypocrisy. Her fall from grace a cautionary tale whispered at the very galas she once ruled. The money she had siphoned from the Children's Trust was fully recovered. But for Julian, the victory was not in her downfall, but in the quiet dawn that followed. He finalized the adoption process, becoming the legal father to Leo, Hope, and Grace. The cavernous mansion, a monument to his past grief, was sold. They moved away from the city, away from the ghosts and the noise, to a sprawling but humble house on the coast, a place of wind and sea and endless sky. The transformation was slow, then all at once. The house, once silent, began to fill with new sounds. The cooing of babies, the patter of small feet, and eventually, the sound of Leo's laughter. Julian found himself changing, too. The stoic billionaire who communicated through intermediaries was now on the floor, building elaborate Lego castles. The man who hadn't smiled in 5 years found himself beaming with pride as Hope took her first wobbly steps. The haunted protector, driven by a ghost, was becoming a present and fulfilled father, healed by the very children he had set out to save. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Leo came to Julian on the veranda. He was no longer the silent, haunted boy from the boat. He was a child again, his eyes bright with curiosity and life. He handed Julian a piece of paper. It was a new drawing. This one showed a warm, sunny house by the sea. On the porch stood 4 stick figures. A tall man, a boy, and 2 babies in his arms. They were all smiling. Leo pointed to the tall figure. "Dad," he said, the word full of a simple, profound trust. Julian pulled the boy into a hug, his heart, which he thought had turned to stone long ago, feeling impossibly full. He had not just rescued them. They had, in every meaningful way, rescued him right back. And so, we see that the most monstrous evils are often hidden behind the most beautiful facades, behind charitable donations and dazzling smiles. True strength is not found in the accumulation of wealth or power, but in the quiet, unwavering resolve to protect the innocent. It is the courage to see the darkness that others ignore and the compassion to bring a hidden truth into the blinding light. For every child who suffers in silence, there is a hope that a protector will appear. How many silent victims are waiting for their voice to be heard? What does it take for a good person to finally say, "No more"? We hope this story has touched your heart. The world can be a dark place, but the light of compassion can always break through. Have you ever witnessed an act of quiet courage that changed someone's life? Please share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the strength to be a shield for those in need.